appreciative of this fine free facility and everything else that KIXE does in this community, and wishing them well. I'm Barb Holder. I'm on the board of the Shasta County Firescaping Council and chair the Education and Outreach Committee, and these presentations are brought to you by our Education and Outreach Committee and our staff, and wonderful support from Barb March with all the goodies out in the lobby and all the other things she does. Would you please silence your phones? We are going to be recording the agency updates in the presentation. One thing I wanted to do, for 2 years we've had wonderful support from Kat Camplin for all of our media needs, and Kat's doing something else now. She has masterfully put out newsletters from her own research and her own knowledge, very little oversight from our council. She's kept the Firewise communities updated, helped with all kinds of support, and Kat, I just wanted to say I think the Fire Safe Councils and I appreciate what you've done over these couple of years. A little hand for Kat. All right, at this point, I want to introduce Ron Rustin, our Executive Director. We're going to hear from agencies who want to give us an update, and you'll hear a little bit of update. Then we will go into our presentation, and I'll introduce our speakers, 2 professors from Chico State. I think this is a whole new arena that I'm glad we're collaborating on and learning about.
Thank you, Barb. My name is Ron Rustin from the Shasta County Firescaping Council, the executive director there, and just wanted to give you a short little update on what we're doing. We have our chipping program that I think everybody's pretty familiar with. So what I know is from last year to this year, the number of piles, the amount of material that has been chipped is about tripled. So it's getting out into the communities. People are learning about it and wanting to participate. Very successful program, and we're looking to continue that for years and continue to apply for new grant money for that. The other thing that we have is we have a project pipeline grant that we received from Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and I've talked about that before. But right now, out in the kind of the Round Mountain Montgomery Creek area, we have approved by Sierra Nevada Conservancy. We have 3 fuel break projects that are in the planning stages out there. Backbone we're not too sure about with the green fire, how much work or how much we might or might not be needing to do there. But we have a couple other fuel breaks going in, possibly some more planned in that area. I know there's a lot of need all over the county, but we're staying within the Sierra Nevada Conservancy boundary for those projects. So we've gone from thinking about it to actually having people on the ground laying them out, and we're hoping to apply for funding for all of these fuel breaks before the end of the year. So that's pretty exciting for us. We're still waiting to hear on our CWDG, the Community Wildfire Defense Grant through USDA. As far as we know, everything's moving forward on that. We were told the awards will go out late summer, so we should know here in the next couple of months, which would really enable us to help a lot of the communities out there with defensible space work, as well as continuing our outreach and education stuff. One of the grants we're looking at putting in for, again, I mentioned Backbone Fuel Break, is through the CAL FIRE CCI Prop 4 grant. That's coming up. We met with CAL FIRE, they're supportive of that, so depending on how much work has been done out there from the fire side of things, we're going to look at applying for that. So a lot of stuff going on. It's pretty busy, and we like that, and we're just hoping to continue as we build the partnerships with everybody that we can in Shasta County, just to help bring more funds to do more work in Shasta County. So with that being said, I'd like to bring up a few of our agency cooperators that are here. I'm going to start with the Forest Service. I'm a retired Forest Service guy, so always put the Forest Service there on the top. So Jesse will give us a quick update on some Forest Service stuff.
Thanks, Ron. Hi, everybody. My name is Jesse Vinland. I work for the U.S. Forest Service out of the Shasta Lake District Office. I'm one of the fire prevention technicians out there. So, quick little update. Before all this lightning that we got starting about July 1st, we've been working pretty heavily on putting a hand line in around our pile burn units on the I-5 project. We've got approximately 5 to 6 miles of hand line put in already. I think there's 21 or 22 miles total that we need to do. This is in order to give us a little bit more leeway in what we can do with these pile burn units. We've actually enacted a type 2 pile plan, and that may not mean a lot to most people, but so type 3 is our typical pile plan, meaning, you know, we light up a pile and we let it burn. It can't really go outside of the, you know, the footprint of the pile. But with a type 2 pile plan, it gives us more leeway on when we can burn these piles, but in order to do that, we have to have the entire units hand lined around it. So we're working on that. Starting July 1st, however, we got a whole bunch of lightning and a couple different storms. Total, we got 6,057 strikes on federal land within Shasta Trinity National Forest. It resulted in 38 fires, which is a pretty good ratio there. I'm glad it was only 38. We kept most of them to single tree strikes or 1/10 of an acre or so. Obviously, the green one got a little bit bigger than that, 19,022 acres total. I was the incident commander on day 2 of that. I've got to tell you, I've been doing this for 15 years. It was the most remote, worst terrain fire I've ever been on. Afterwards, I've got some videos from a helicopter I can show you if you'd like. But through that, we got, Aaron Hathaway kind of mentioned it earlier, Backbone Ridge is a project that we've been looking at doing, and they did significant work on Backbone Road. Finders Ferry Road also got a ton of work done on. And that's about it. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Jesse. Aaron.
Yep, coming up.
There he is. I just wanted to put him on the spot.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I could have easily moved on, but no.
Excellent, welcome. So, just wanted to give kind of an update of what we have going on in the unit. We've had a lot of lightning over the last week and a half, and actually expecting more today. They're expecting about 10,000 strikes through this evening in the North State. If you go back to the last round, we had over 50,000 strikes in the North State. 4,400 of those landed on SHU's property, or property that we fight fire over, SRA. And we ended up having 36 fires on the east side of Shasta Trinity unit. Mostly like, think, well, down on the pit grade, right? Like down back behind Bernie, pit grade all through there, between 89 essentially and 299 is where a lot of those took place. Out of those 36 fires, the largest was less than an acre. So we're pretty happy with the 10,000 strikes we have coming in this tonight, essentially is what they're estimating. We've kept a lot of our resources that we had helping with the fires there. So we have all our in-unit resources, and we have like a bunch of out-of-unit resources that have helped us put out those other fires. So we expect to keep anything small that might start out of that. So we're really excited with how that's happened. Wanted to give a kind of quick update of some of the fuels stuff that we've accomplished over the last year. So here in Shasta Trinity unit, we burnt over 5,200 acres in black acres for vegetation projects. Over this last year, that's up from about 1,700 the year before. So we're really ramping up. We don't have a set goal. When I talk to my boss, like, hey, what do you want me to say for a set goal that we're trying to accomplish? And he said, more. And that's what the answer was. It's just more, right? We don't have a set goal. We're just, every year we're trying to increase more. So we did 5,200 acres of black acres, 17,284 acres of vegetation removal. I got it handed out to our cut subcontractors through our grants. The bulk of that was done through them. On CAL FIRE resources, I think we ended up with about 1,700 acres. So that's from all our crews and our fire engines going out there and working on these projects. We ourselves did about 1,700 acres. The rest is all through grant-funded programs, and so we really hit it on like large sum of that actually come from the Alaskan Fire Safe Council when they went up into Shingletown and did, I think, almost like 9,000 acres through that Shingletown area. So they're pretty lucky up in that area. And compare that to last year, and we'll talk defensible space inspections. So this last year we accomplished over 7,000 defensible space inspections between engines and us. The year before that, we were hovering right at that like 4,100. So we are taking on the mantra of my division chief and more, and so that's what we're trying. And I'm really excited for this qualified entity class that we're going to be putting on, because those numbers don't come to us as you guys go to those assessments. But what I hope it will spark is phone calls from those people having us come and actually assess their, like do an actual inspection on their home afterwards. So the goal is for us to get to every property every 3 years. Just in Shasta County, there's 27,000 parcels with houses on it that we're responsible for. We're gonna have to do more. So that's what the goal is.
Thanks, Aaron, appreciate it. Yeah, and I'm sure we all know here in Shasta County, when it comes to fuels mitigation, there's more to do. There's plenty of work out there, so we appreciate what everybody's doing. Sarah from Reading City Fire.
Morning, Sarah Roth, City of Reading Fire Department, the fire prevention specialist. It'll be short and sweet. We don't got too much going on, but we have our fuels crew out right now. The goats are also out working on critical infrastructure areas, called 900 in Reading. We also just completed hiring for a new fuels reduction crew, which will be following through where those goats hit and then doing more management within those areas out to 100 feet of, critical infrastructure and further. There's areas off of Kenyon and Panorama that we'll also be working on. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We have our CAL FIRE grant, so thanks for being able to hire on that additional fuels crew. So at this point, we'll have about 12 to 15 new crew members that can help with these areas outside of the normal parks routes. And we're looking forward to getting more work done. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, one thing that I forgot to mention in the update is for the Fire Council is that we created or have that partnership now with Reading City Fire, and actually did a field trip out at Crown Estates for the Firewise communities, and Firewise communities are well supported, represented here today. We appreciate that. But I've neglected to mention that we've hired a new county coordinator, Amanda Macon, that's stepped into that role to help support the Firewise communities out there. And that grant comes from CAL FIRE through the California Fire Safe Council. So we were excited to get that funding. We're excited to hire Amanda, get her started, just really to support what the Firewise communities are doing out there. So we're hoping that funding will continue to go and just be more integrated within Shasta County to continue the good work that's already started. And Rob from Shasta County Sheriff's.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Rob Sandlin, the Lieutenant with the Shasta County Sheriff's Office and Shasta County OES. Here today, again, because this is a great thing that we're doing for our community, a great thing that you folks are doing for the community. And here in the North State, the Sheriff's Office, fire departments can't do all this by ourselves. We need the community support and input to get this done. one of the reasons being here today, again, for this partnership, but I also brought along my new sergeant that just got assigned to us. He's actually the boating safety sergeant, Heston McDaniel. But with that umbrella, he gets the dive team and he gets search and rescue. And with search and rescue, that's our incident management team as well. So whenever we have an incident that requires some type of evacuation, that 4-letter F word that we use up here, he would respond to that and help with evacuations and road closures and things like that. So I thought it was important for him to be here, show his face, see what this program is about, and introduce him to you folks as well. Things that we've been doing here at the Sheriff's Office, countywide. At the beginning of the month, we did a pre-season fire meeting with all of our law enforcement, our fire departments, county roads, Caltrans, Forest Service personnel, where we get together, we get in a room, we talk about when there's gonna be an incident, what's gonna happen. Why is it important for us to meet up, discuss this ahead of time so we know? So when there's an incident, we roll up, I recognize the person that's coming up. You know, here's Aaron. I recognize, I've talked to Aaron before. Aaron knows and what to expect on the CAL FIRE side and vice versa. So we had this meeting down at our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, and it was a packed room. And prior to having this meeting, agencies were reaching out, hey, when are we going to have this preseason meeting? Especially when we have these new promotions or new people coming into leadership roles, it's important for them to be there so that they understand when these incidents happen and what their role is and how we can work well together and everything runs smoothly. So that was a great turnout. We got that done. That was July 1st. Then, as everybody's talked about, we had those lightning strikes come in. We roll into 4th of July weekend. The green fire starts off. The Forest Service immediately reaches out, gets us involved, not because we needed to do evacuations and like that, but again, have that partnership and be ready, have that open communication and let us know what's going on so that we can start planning out if we did have to do evacuations or put in road closures. And then on the 11th of July, they called and said, hey, it's time to do some road or some evacuations. So I went into work later in the evening is when we did the evacuations, thinking about what resources we're going to need to accomplish this. Because if you don't know where the green fire is, it's a good 2-hour drive to get up into some of those homes, maybe even 4 hours for some of the more rural ones, just based on how the roads are built. And we actually went in there with some boat officers as well to make notifications. But it was really exciting to get down to my office and see all these search and rescue vehicles in the parking lot. And when I came in, they were just briefing to go out and do an overnight training for the Jeep team and some ground personnel and everything like that. And I said, your training's been canceled. I have a new assignment for you. So boom, right there we had all those volunteers, those search and rescue volunteers to go out and help our patrol officers get those evacuations done. It really worked out well. And the exciting thing about that is they had just done a large-scale training with our search and rescue volunteers to go out into the community. They pre-planned this, they notified the community, they got the community's involvement and said, hey, we want to practice. We don't want to wait for an incident to happen for us to go out and do it. We want to train our new people and be prepared. So they went out to a community. They had one guy driving around with yellow lights on his vehicle representing the danger, and he would drive through the neighborhoods, and then they went out and made the notifications. We didn't do the alerts like we would normally do on a real one, but we went out and did the door-to-door notifications. They practiced what kind of information to provide to the homeowners, what information, not only directions you should go, collection points or where the shelter's gonna be, what stuff you should take as well. But where would you go if something happened and you decided not to leave? What information could they extract from these people so that later on, if these people are then reported missing, we could have a path to try to find them and locate them. So again, this real-world training that they did was implemented in a real-world incident, and it all worked out. And these are all these volunteers that we depend on at the Sheriff's Office to get a lot of this stuff done, just like the volunteers we have here in front of us. So with that, Jesse talked about the green fire, the acreage it's been holding. I think we're just under 90% for containment. We still have some warnings up there, and hopefully in the next few days, we'll be able to reduce that back to green and move on, with the next incident we have.
Thanks, Rob. I just want to thank all the agencies for taking the time to not only be here, but to give us an update on what's going on with their agencies out in the county. So that's it for me, Barb. I'm going to hand it back to you.
That's just some fine professionalism we just heard about. It just makes me really grateful that we have these dedicated people doing such wonderful work. It's going to make a difference. Rob, thank you for going out to Firewise communities, and CAL FIRE, Aaron, for always being so available for information. It's just an ongoing relationship and much appreciated. All right, so if we're on standby here, I want to thank Adrienne Edwards, who just broke her foot and decided to come anyway. I don't know if you're sitting here, but whatever the plans are, let's implement them right now. And Rachel Schleiger, two professors from Chico State, and I really appreciate that you have agreed to come all the way up here to talk to us. This is about, I think we're going to get a lot of tips, and so appreciate. And you brought books for sale, and they can tell us about that after their presentation.
Thank you so much for having us. We are very passionate about this topic, as you obviously are as well. And we are from Chico, living in the campfire footprint. And we've seen a lot of recovery. It's long-going, long process, as you know, here in Shasta County too. But we live in a beautiful place in the world. And we want to live in these beautiful places. But one thing that struck us as botanists, plant ecologists, is that we don't want to just move into these landscapes, create Swiss cheese with a lot of holes that are barren and don't support wildlife. And so in this talk, we want to talk about some key sort of landscaping paradigms, some ways of thinking about how we decorate around our house to reduce, that we need to change. We need to change the mindset. And then we'll talk about some ways that maybe we can live more harmoniously in fire landscapes. How are we gonna do the slides here? Okay, so I want to begin by just saying we acknowledge that wildfire can be a source of deep trauma, displacing families, destroying homes, and leaving deep emotional scars. We also know and recognize the role of good fire, controlled and cultural burns, as ecological and traditional practices that can manage fuel loads and sustain healthy ecosystems, as you were speaking of. And I just want to say that we honor your experiences, your sorrows, your hardships, your joys in these beautiful landscapes as they relate to fire. Just briefly, I'm going to do a very quick review to remind us all who's at greatest risk due to wildfire. You are a very knowledgeable group and already are well aware of much of this. Then we're going to talk about these four sort of problematic landscaping paradigms, and then propose a new paradigm to help guide our landscaping. So, who's at risk? I'm going to discuss the WUI and non-WUI and structures in adjacent defensible space very quickly. You've probably all heard this term, the wildland-urban interface. That's where human development intersects with the wildlands around us. And the most recent research paper I've seen, I think this needs to be updated, especially given some of the fires we've seen in the last 10 years. 82% of all structures burned during wildfire events occurred in the WUI. And that includes both interface and intermix landscapes. That doesn't mean that people who are in urban and rural areas are immune, however. Next slide. And these are just some excellent aerial photos from Reading showing a typical interface area. That is the absolute most high risk for percentage of homes lost when homes interface against a wildland environment. And then intermix accounts for about 1/3 of that 82% of homes lost. These are from data that were accumulated through
2013, I think.
Yeah, 1985 to 2013.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see an update of that
Absolutely.
research. Okay, next. All right, and so if you have to prioritize wildfire readiness, I love this book I just picked up outside on your table, the Landscaping Plant Guide put together by your FireWise and FireSafe people. And it, of course, reinforces the idea that flying embers are the #1 source of home ignitions during a wildfire event. We would argue that the first fire-safe practice that you can take is hardening your home itself, the structure, the screens, etc. And then think about your landscape and then ripple out into your community, which is what you guys are doing next. As people living in these environments, though, you know there's a trade-off between fire safety and how much it's going to cost you to be fire safe. And the California Safe Homes Act, in the process of being developed and passed, maybe on an accelerated schedule, is emphasizing first and foremost fire safe roofing, including those vents that don't allow the embers in. And there's a lot of argument over this 5-foot non-combustible zone, right? And we're gonna touch on that a little bit. The benefit is that that's a hard and fast rule that you can just quickly say, oh, you don't have your 5 feet, you gotta fix that, right? On the other hand, we've all seen structures burn where, depending on the prevailing wind conditions, it's the plants that survive and not the structure. So it's gonna be a thorny issue in terms of, you know, energy conservation, habitat, water resources, etc. But ultimately, we've got to have community level strategies to be able to ensure our neighborhoods as well. Okay. This slide sort of sums up in a nutshell fire safe landscaping zones. The non-combustible zone, of course, is 5 feet minimum. If you're in a high-risk zone like Rachel, she's like in the absolute worst possible place that you could live for wildfire, and her home survived the campfire, barely, right? You would have to multiply by 3 at least, right? So that non-combustible zone would be 15 to 20 feet. But just the next zone beyond non-combustible can be lean, clean, and green. And then further out beyond 30 feet, according to research, doesn't appear to be that important, as important, right? Because you can lay down that fire if you're controlling the fuels and the wind around your structures. Okay, that's it. Well, and actually go back for just a second. If you're on a slope, of course, eliminating all the greenery on a slope is going to cause the slope to fail. And so you do have to keep in mind the spacings because of course when you light a match and put it on a slope, the steeper the slope, the more likely you're going to have preheating from one flammable fuel to the next. And yet, we've got to hang on to that root architecture to stabilize slopes, and there's research being done identifying specific species that have different root architectures that are ideal for low, the bottom of the slope, the middle of the slope, and the top of the slope. It's very interesting. Okay. So, bottom line is you've got to keep in mind the horizontal and vertical guidelines, which you are all aware about for spacing. But I was a little bummed to hear that someone had to cut down their tree because there's people saying you can't have any fuels underneath a tree. But we know in oak woodlands, if there's not a lot of fuel underneath the drip line of a tree and you've limbed it up, it can actually capture embers because that's water containing live tissue in a healthy tree. And so again, as you know, you have to evaluate each site for whatever specific dynamics are there. But we don't want to go too far, right? And that could be an interesting thing to discuss afterwards, right? The presence of fuel close to the house, of course, is something that can shatter windows. It can make your home a target, as you know. But you've got, the key is to not have connectivity between, or connections between the flammable, combustible fuels. And, we've driven around Paradise in some of those rebuilt home areas. There's a huge gravel, bunch of gravel being distributed. But we're starting to see a little bit of backwards thinking in terms of fire safety because of some of the landscaping paradigms that we have that are hard to break. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So the first one is foundation plantings, right, which tend to be in that non-combustible zone. Planting directly adjacent to buildings is something that the kids will even do when they're playing with house structures and they have little plastic or wooden shrubberies. They'll jam them up next to the house for decoration. Next slide. So this is an example of, of a house that was rebuilt. They have a great fence, but a really sad landscape, right? So they have a green patch of lawn right next to the house. It's kept short and watered, and they've got 2 tones of gravel, and then they've got all of those flammables tucked in on their porch, right? Because we want to decorate our structures. We have to rethink how we do that. We need to shift away from those paradigms. This is a photo I grabbed offline that's in Berkeley, where the 5-foot zone is somewhat respected there. It still looks like they have, I don't know if that's wood siding and a hose attached to the house. There are still fire risks there, but we need to start thinking away from our structures visually. Next slide. So again, the key is the non-combustible zone is a really convenient guideline. But hydrated, non-resinous plants are more resistant than structures to combustion. And they could potentially even, who knows, give you a little bit more time to escape. Because all of this landscaping and all of this fire-safe thinking and home hardening is mainly to make sure that you have as much time as possible to evacuate, bottom line. This is a photo that came from Ashland, and I was really struck by this, sort of illustrating how this big shrub was heated on one side, but this structure survived, and yet there are problems here. So I think the fire people came in and maybe bulldozed through there and saved this house. But you can see also there are a lot of problems with fuel connections with a wood fence attached to the house, etc. So a lot of this is just which way the wind's blowing and how lucky you are. So second paradigm is all about moisture. Water conservation is super important in California, and we've adapted it as a way to control weeds and make things look neat and tidy. Next slide. But if you have any combustible mulches near your structures, they will burn. And this is a really lovely demonstration that was done. Any kind of combustible mulches can serve as fuel to carry the flames, and that includes AstroTurf. That includes shredded rubber mulches, and let me show you how that looks in a comparison. So this graph shows in these different shades of orange and yellow, the top orange is flame height, the yellow bars are rate of spread, and the dark orange at the bottom is temperature. So you can see that shredded rubber is really bad. As gardeners, probably you would turn your nose up at it anyway, but I do see it used. So it's going to be highly likely to ignite other things, right? An interesting feature of this is, though, that if your wood chips or your wood mulch is composted and full of mycelia, and full of fungal, you know, those white threads, it contains more moisture and it's less combustible. It doesn't mean you would want to put it in the non-combustible zone, but it's more resistant to ignition than regular woody mulch. And yet when I see houses like that house in Paradise where they put down the 2 tones of gravel, I know that there's a weed barrier there. I know there's that thick gravel, and they basically destroyed the habitat. There is no habitat. 70% of our native bees actually nest underground. And these are everything from the itty bitty ones to, most of them are stingless bees, super important to support our pollinators. Many butterfly and moth species use soil and organic matter as well. At my home, I actually have what I call a leaf swale, where I can just put all the leaves in a depression. It tends to stay wetter, it's away from the house, and it biodegrades over the year, but also provides habitat. So it's this image may look attractive to some folks, and yet they have, you know, their barbecue grill next to their house. But it has absolutely removed the habitat, and they might as well have just poured concrete, which of course is fire resistant. Proof. There are lots of non-combustible options, and one that I would highlight is that maybe we need to think more about using bare soil. And in fact, we should all provide some pockets of bare soil in our landscapes for native bees and other insects to nest in, because they can't get through thick layers of organic mulch or gravel or weed barrier. And sometimes that bare soil can be super easy to maintain if you don't irrigate it. pavers actually make really good habitat as well because the native bees will burrow right adjacent to the pavers in the soil. Decomposed granite, of course, is non-combustible, but it actually has a really high carbon footprint. And unless it's done really well in a landscape where you're not going to be irrigating a lot, in a few years it will have a bunch of weeds in it. So, maybe use it with, don't get too much of it or it's going to give you a maintenance issue. And this is just a very recent paper showing all of the ways that native bees that nest underground interact with ecosystems and affect the chemical, biological, and just physical properties of the soil. The third paradigm I wanted to talk about was fences. Okay. And they really influence how we perceive and experience our surroundings. They manage our personal relationships, and they're often installed just as sort of a knee-jerk reaction because that's kind of the American way. We fence ourselves off. We fence our properties off. And so maybe it's time to rethink how and where and why we use fences. Maybe we're going a little overboard. Next slide. So I made this graphic on the x-axis is the amount of privacy you may want in an area, and the y-axis is your fire risk. And of course, fire risk increases from non-combustible fencing made of metal or rock to organic wood and plant-based fencing up to wood fences. Wood fences shed embers more effectively than probably anything else around your home. It's dry wood, right? Next slide. So there are lots of non-combustible combinations you can think of. I'm seeing this more often in the landscape. There are expensive options like Corten and Sleek Fence. But even just, people are doing some creative things with corrugated tin roofing as well. Clearly, in that 0 to 5 zone, maybe even a little further, you don't want a wood fence attached to your house. Oops. Living fences are an option as well if they're kept lean, clean, and green. Not against the house, but as you can see in the top left, a very clean with bare soil, well pruned and irrigated hedge actually can capture embers and keep them away from you for a while, right? There are lots of creative ways to do this, but again, I didn't know this was a thing until recently, that people will buy plastic vinyl ivy leaves to put on fences. Bad idea, obviously. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, I wanted to go back. I pulled this bottom left slide from a very nice CNPS site showing an example of that 0 to 5 clean space. Having a burn, a planted burn with rocks could also serve as a fence depending on how much space you have, and if it's lean, clean, and green. But right behind there in the back is a 6-foot-high fence with a 2-foot lattice extension on it between the two houses. So depending on the wind and all that could be a really bad idea. If you're going to have wood fencing away from your house, one thing you can do, not in the summer, but in the middle of a wet winter, is you can do a charring technique. And if you char wood, it actually reduces its ignition, or it raises the ignition point, which means it's less ignitable than raw wood, because it burns off some of the celluloses and leaves the lignins. This is the other reason that when you try and burn bark for a lot of species, it tends to take longer to get it to ignite in a campfire because it's got more lignin and less cellulose. Wood that's high in tannin content also, when it's charred, creates these sheets of graphene that are more fire resistant. So just another sort of landscaping option to think about with fences. Okay, so what's wrong with this picture? Anybody want to shout out some things that they're noticing about this, which was advertised online as a good firescape, a good fire-safe landscape? The wood fencing between the two houses.
There's also a wood fence touching the house.
Wood fence touching the house. What about habitat? I'm seeing people shaking their heads. It's sterile.
Even if this was real grass, it's not. It's fake grass.
It's astroturf, right? So, so you all need to help educate people about what it means to live in these beautiful places without destroying the actual habitat. Next slide.
I think it's my turn.
And now Rachel's going to take over and give you a break from me. You want to?
You're doing great.
Oh, right, you're going to have to.
There's one a little bit more.
Actually, yeah, he could use these buttons.
Actually, it's okay.
But I don't.
Wait, is this okay?
No, you should stand up there. No?
Yeah?
You're fine.
Okay. All right. So Adrienne focused a lot on discussing fuels because as people that are trying to be as fire ready as possible, the one thing we can control is fuels, which is why we talk about them so much. But one important thing to understand, or that we all need to understand, is that fuels dictate fire behavior on our landscapes, but not all of the behavior that we see in wildfires is dictated by fuels alone. Wind is an essential variable for us to consider when we're thinking about our landscapes. And as Adrienne said multiple times, wind is something we cannot control. And there's a lot of luck involved with whether we get to keep our structures or not, or whether our structures are there when we come back to them because of winds. And one of the main things I wanted to show you, I actually have a wildlife camera on my property. And it was there the whole time the campfire was approaching my structure. And so I just wanted to show a couple pictures as it was getting closer. This is one that you can see it's approaching the glow on the side corner there. But if you look at the embers, they are just streaking through. And so when we see these really dangerous fires coming through, this is what's happening on our landscapes. And this is something we need to consider when it comes to how we make decisions. And again, it's not something we can control, but it is something important to consider. I'm going to talk about why. So there's just a few more pictures, just kind of showing the glow and movement. But one of the biggest things that I wanted to connect to this idea was that when we are in the fall, breaking up all the leaves or all the needles, all the duff that comes off of our plants, they tend to accumulate in certain spots. These spots tend to be eddies for wind. So when you're walking around your property, I want you to take note of where you see the most buildup of fuels. And we are not guaranteed that the same winds are going to be there during the fire event, but it can be a strong correlative effect of where eddies are going to happen around your house, where fuel is going to accumulate. So these are going to be the areas you really want to focus on when it comes to clearing the most. And especially areas that can have little tiny cracks. So like I showed a picture up here of where my house meets my deck. And you can see there's all these leaves that got stuck in that little crack. So I highly pay attention to these zones during fire season. They don't have as much accumulated, but they can still have little bits of fuels that are in there that I like to keep clear. Okay, so one of the big fuel questions that we have that relate to advice that we hear, because when we're, implementing defensive space, we hear, okay, we need to clear out 100 feet or keep clearance up to 100 feet from our structures. And some people hear, that means I need to murder all the trees and shrubs on my whole property. But that is not true. We don't need to do that. So there are some things to consider regarding the plants and also how they can connect to the wind movement and abatement around our structures. So we're gonna chat about that. Okay, so first off, we need to consider our species, which we will continue to most likely chat about as we continue. For trees specifically, we want to pick species that are not conifers, not resinous. These species tend to be very good at igniting. So for example, when I moved into my house, there was like 3 or 4 ponderosa pines within 10 feet of the house. A couple of them got struck by lightning, and I was like, oh, this is not good. And they all had sap just all over. I was like, nope. So I got rid of all of them, and I take care and love on all of my oaks within that second lean, clean, and green zone. Oaks are a great species and are much harder to ignite. We also need to consider the condition of the trees, or shrubs, whatever the plants are. Because even if it is a species that is recommended in the amazing booklets that we see, or even a wonderful oak species, if they're not healthy, that is going to increase the risk of them combusting. So overall, the healthier the plant, the more resistance they have to ignition. And then we also want to consider ladder fuels. Adrienne talked about that in our basic introduction to defensive space. So we want to think about vertical and horizontal spacing. We want to think about our slopes and all of that. And then lastly, building up to the wind connection, how do winds flow around this tree, this set of trees, these shrubs? And what direction is the wind coming from? Is it intense? We need to make note of these things, because any plant that has a significant amount of vertical space in your landscapes is going to be something that can reduce wind intensities. And as Adrienne said before, they can also act as ember catchers. As also she said before, our houses are made of dead wood. There is no longer any water in any of those wood cells anymore. Plants that are well hydrated and healthy are full of water. So they are very good at being a green ember catcher. So that could be something to consider. And I am going to talk about a couple examples here. Okay, so one example, again, going back to my structure. One of the biggest things that was important to me when I moved in, I live in an intermixed community that is within a huge canopied forest. I wanted to prioritize my trees, not anything else under my trees. We pretty much got rid of almost everything except for a tiny little shrub there that has no trees within at least 30-ish feet of it. And there's a lot of spacing in between that and the canopies above. I honestly want to get rid of it, but nonetheless, we focused on our trees. And that was something that allowed the winds during the campfire to just go up and over my structure. There was a neighbor that I had that had a 2-acre parcel. They got rid of every shrub and tree. So you can imagine that parcel like chopped out of the forest, a big rectangle of nakedness with a house in the center. When the winds came through, that rectangle acted as a funnel. And the only thing that those embers, as you saw earlier, were gonna catch was the structure. There was nothing else those embers were going to hit other than the structure. So I wanted to prioritize my trees so they can allow the wind to move as it naturally moves above the canopy. Not everybody has that, but this is an example of how you need to think about your own unique properties and how you can go with that and make priorities based on what's going to be the best for your structure and your safety. The other example here is another family that made the same decision that lives in Sonoma County. Their house was an old wood house. They had a very similar, like I said, focus point for their objectives, keeping the trees healthy and keeping almost no fuels underneath those trees. And there's a lot of other examples. We just wanted to bring in a couple. But nonetheless, it's important to notice our wins. So here are a few different apps or websites that are really great for helping us understand our wins. Watch Duty is obviously an all-in-one situation. It talks about the current fires, their sizes, evacuation zones, winds. But I really like the other two because they tell you or make predictions for future wind conditions. And this is important if there is a current fire and you are potentially in the path of that fire. If you want to know, I'm not in an evacuation zone right now, am I most likely going to be? Look at the winds. The winds are going to tell you which way that fire is likely to move long term and whether you should pack it up or maybe just keep a watch on it. So winds are super important for our emergency action plans as families, as communities. But on the smaller scale, you also want to think about your individual properties and how you can use those ideas of wind and your plants to play the game as smart as we can. So like Adrienne said, we can have as much time as possible if there's a fire event to get out and maybe get lucky that our houses don't burn and we have them when we come back. But safety of our individual lives is more important than our structures. Okay, so a little bit about fuels, a little bit about winds. We also wanted to introduce ourselves a new paradigm because as Adrienne said, we are plant ecologists, we are biologists at heart, we love our wildlife. So we want to focus on how we can support wildlife as much as we can while also being and following all instructions for fire safety on our landscapes and in our homes. So we want to introduce a few different ideas for how to do that. So why do we care about this? Like what is habitat fragmentation? So it's pretty much when we come to these areas that we love. We love these forested landscapes, we love these habitats, we want to move into them. So we have that breaks up the landscape, that breaks up the habitat, and habitat fragmentation is the #1 driver for biodiversity loss. So all of the plants, all of the animals that we love and why we've chosen to live here, they are dying, going extinct at a rate that is extreme because we love living in these spaces. So we want to do as much as we can to support them where possible. So if we think about our fragmented landscape, as we see on the right, we can think of our houses as little pavers in between the habitat. These pavers can provide no habitat whatsoever, so being a habitat and or wildlife desert, so to speak. They could be completely poisonous pavers, where if you land there and there's Roundup, dead, sad face. Or we could have some great, not extreme, but some great plant options that we pick that can provide oases for our loved birds, insects, etc. So we want to allow ourselves to have landscapes that act as stepping stones in between our habitats so we can still see all the lovely things that we moved here in the first place to see. Oh, yes. We want to see the bottom, not the top. No deserts or poisonous papers. Okay, so when we're looking at this structure, we unfortunately do not have the happy insects and birds. This provides plants that are the stereotypical ones that you see at big box stores. Very little pollen availability or nectar resources for our insects that support our birds, etc., going up the food chain. They also typically in those plants have neonicotinoids. Why can't I say that word?
Neonicotinoids.
See, this is why she's here. She's helping me out. And it also looks, because I see no weeds in there, that it's most likely that you have potential Roundup being used. We can't, we're making assumptions here. But when yards look this good, I have questions. Because if there's no Roundup being used, there's weeds, it's a constant battle. But, that's the choice that I made. But not everybody has to make the same decisions. But we're just saying we need to understand that when we use certain things, that even if it says it's safe-ish, it's not really. So we want to create lovely habitat as much as we can for our insects. The insects are the base of the food chain when it comes to our landscapes. And over the last few decades actually, we've seen a
50 years.
Yeah, 50 years, holy smokes. 75% reduction in our insects. And this is not good, because like I said, it is the bottom of the food chain. It is what allows all of the other things in our yard to be very happy. All of the birds especially. I don't know about everybody, but I feel like everyone in the North State is a big bird nerd. We are lovers of birds. We celebrate the birds coming in for migration every year. We want to support them. So we want to support the insects that support their presence on our landscape. Okay, so correlated here, as we've seen a decline in our insects, we've seen a decline in our birds that match that directly. So overall, we're seeing a functional loss of the amazing, beautiful, complex food webs that we see ecologically. And that is what is continuing to drive these trends of decreased critters on our landscapes. So we want to think about plants. The plants that can provide those positive benefits to our insects, to our birds, and make wonderful choices that are still fire safe. So one of the best phrases that at least we've heard in making those choices is called making or planting habitat islands. So islands, you're thinking of spacing between plantings, between fuels, meaning horizontally and vertically we are maintaining our safe spaces. But we can have little patches of habitat in between those spaces. And so we need to think about how we can do this. And as we said, every yard is different, every habitat is different. So this bottom left photo here made a similar decision to me in focusing on their big trees in their yard. And you can see there's pretty much nothing else in the yard besides those trees. But other people don't prioritize their trees. They want little plants, or I should say small to moderate sized plants or plantings in their little islands. And so it's all about you and your unique wants and choices on your properties, but also the properties themselves and what makes sense for those properties. So when it comes to plants, what is the most important thing to understand is that fireproof is not a word that should ever be used. Everything, when it comes to plants, it is going to be flammable at some level. It is going to light up. There's no fireproof. If your plant is a rock, then congratulations. But that's not what we're looking for here. So there's no such thing as a fireproof plant. There are qualities of plants that make them more fireproof, more resistant to fire ignition, sorry. The word was on my brain. And so here are a few examples of not so great plants that can be highly flammable because of resins, because of the type of plant that they are, or the amount of debris that they shoot out, or all of those things to put together. One of the ones that we wanted to highlight, which we hate the most as ecologists, is oleander. And it is something that I see everywhere. I see every time I go to the box store, there's oleanders everywhere. And it is important to note, because they don't put these on the plant tags. They are highly toxic plants to us, to our children, to our pets, and to insects. So there's nothing that they help by being present on the landscape. So we want to think about that a little bit more. They also can harbor pest insects that don't die because of being touched by oleander, which is also really not good, especially for our agricultural farmers that we have in these areas that are trying to keep those pests away from their crop. And the other thing we wanted to note is because this comes into contention a lot. Some people love oleander, and it is something that is recommended to some people to plant. And we will say, when it is a young plant, it can be highly fire resistant. But when it gets older, it gets more and more flammable. It puts more and more stuff out that's harder to clean up. It's harder to maintain the debris that is in the plant itself. So we also see lots of oils and resins, especially in mature plants as well. So if you're like, oh, well, I'll just plant it and dig it up. Have you ever tried to dig up an oleander? No, don't do it. So just say no. Just say no.
And when they burn, that if you inhale that smoke, it's really toxic.
Yeah, okay. So here we have some examples of better choices, but we were a little distressed because our newest updated PowerPoint didn't have our new plans on here. But Adrienne, did you want to chat about that?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to emphasize one of the other things we're seeing happening in rebuilding footprints, say of the campfire, are people are putting in junipers. And sometimes those junipers are close to the house. And I'm seeing you shaking your heads, right? That's a bad choice. Because it's got oils and resins, it's just as flammable or more flammable than your typical pine tree. Palm trees, we're seeing a lot of palms being done. Large palm trees can be flamethrowers. They are like matchsticks that throw embers. Really bad choice. I don't know why there's this, why they're so popular now. So the first example there is a California lilac, native plant, great pollinator plant, but it's cleaned up. It's cleaned up, it's away from the structure, although it's hard to see from that perspective, with no fuels beneath. So if a fire comes through, maybe it'll burn, maybe it'll resprout, maybe it'll, but it's clean and it's away from the house. A lot of people think that succulents are a good choice. Yuccas and lots of other succulents are being sold out there because they contain water. However, once they start getting old, they get lots and lots of dead material underneath those succulent leaves and can be just as flammable as a juniper. I would also highlight quail bush as an example of a good pollinator plant that's somewhat resistant to ignition because it has a high salt and water content in the leaves. However, once again, it would have to have good spacing, be kept clean, lean, clean, and green. Okay. We're almost done.
Yeah.
Almost done. So this is a picture, I'm afraid it's from SoCal, but it's illustrating how They obviously live next to Chaparral. You can't really see off the edge of the projector, but they have a little planting circle right up next to the house. They put AstroTurf and pavers in, and then they've got all these flamethrowers planted into the chaparral. And it's being advertised as fire-safe landscaping. So we have a long way to go. We all do, and we're all learning in the process. And that's it. Yes, questions?
I just like to point out that in the case of the Dudley, we're talking about a much smaller plant than, the cedar or whatever, juniper. So that makes it a much easier job to maintain the dead leaves out of that little plant. And it's also not going to burn very long if it didn't catch on fire.
Absolutely, the size of your plants, keeping them, well, lean, green, clean, hydrated, and the size, I love having wildflowers right up next to my house until fire season, and then they're all cleared out, right? I wanted to highlight this landscaping book is great, however, it's featuring mostly non-native plants, many of which that are highly invasive, especially in riparian zones. So things like tree of heaven, things like privet, things like I was leafing through it. Oh, catalpa. Catalpa has lovely flowers, but if you're anywhere, one tree can produce hundreds of thousands of seeds and be highly invasive in irrigated landscapes and near riparian corridors. So it's a good idea to look into alternatives that will both support wildlife and not invade and spread. Hackberry is another one I saw listed in here. So, okay. Thank you so much. You've been sitting here a long time with all these meetings. And you've been great for us.
I think there's a whole new arena of learning going on here for all of us, and if we want to promote that learning, I know you brought some of your books for sale, so if you're interested, you could gather over there. And again, we have this recorded. We can peruse it and think hard about our landscaping and do better for wildlife. Thank you very much for coming. That'll end our session. Yes, Doug?
Just real quick for folks that maybe watch this online or something, where would they obtain these books if needed?
Well, we're trying to sell them pretty much at cost. We'll make about $5 each. But you can buy them on any platform online. They're readily available. Thrift books, Amazon,
The big ones, the
Walmart,
small ones,
the
you
big
can order
ones,
at
the
your
small
local
ones,
bookstore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the name of it right there.
Yeah.
So if you watch this video, you'll have the name of the book and could research it.
And we have lots of native plant recommendations as substitutions for things like oleander that are not good choices. Even though some firescaping recommendations are saying oleander would be good, it's not so good.
A wealth of knowledge. Really wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you.